Hello and welcome to this video. Let's talk photography with the Canon R5, but mainly using the Canon RF 35mm 1.8 lens. My name's Barry Beckham. Please consider subscribing to my channel, and if you hit that notification bell, you'll be informed whenever I post a new video. When I bought my Canon R5 body, it came with an offer of the 35mm 1.8 lens via the cashback scheme. I probably would never have bought a 35mm lens, I have to admit, but it was there for the asking, so I asked and I received. Now I understand that this is the cheapest lens in the RF mount range for R designated cameras. I feel the need to make it clear that I'm a practical user of my photographic equipment. I don't have any interest or patience for technical testing, especially lenses. I prefer to just get on and use the equipment, and I rely on my confidence in the brand of camera that I'm using. In this case, it's Canon. It's been quite a long time since I've owned a fixed focal length lens, and I suppose we could describe a 35mm lens as a mid-range wide angle. In my early days with photography, a 50mm lens was always considered a standard lens, and a 28mm was always considered a respectable wide angle. I doubt much has changed there, so our 35mm sits nicely between those two. I did invest in a polarizing filter for this lens. It's quite a small one with a diameter of just 52mm. We have to remember, of course, that the polarizer does restrict the light falling onto the sensor, but here we're using a 35mm lens which is image stabilized on a camera body that's also stabilized. So losing a couple of stops of light is not likely to be a big issue for us. Now we always think of a polarizing filter being used to make that blue sky darker and those fluffy clouds stand out. But it's also a very good choice for subjects like these, especially in wet conditions. It takes away reflections and it can improve the impact of your images taken in the forest. So what do I think of this 35mm RF lens? I think it's fine when I'm walking around generally here in Australia, those times when I'm just taking some pictures of whatever appeals to me at the time. Nothing too specific, and we all have those days, right? The polarizer helps with these style of images too. The lens is great, but I do miss the versatility of a zoom lens. I find myself wanting to go wider quite often. So I'm personally finding the 35mm can be a little restricting for my own style of photography. For many years I've used two of Canon's EF lenses as pretty much standard lenses. The 28 to 135mm image stabilized lens and also the 24 to 105mm. Now we can use our EF lenses on our cameras via an EF to RF adapter. But just a purely personal note here, I'm not a great fan of that. Now I can't pretend that this is a major problem, it really isn't, and it's more personal. But I found that in practice it's just a little annoying juggling the RF and EF lenses in the same camera bag and with the adapter too. The rear cap for these lenses also need to be kept on the right lens, just another little fiddle while changing lenses. I am getting just a little off subject here, but it's all relative and I think it's worth a mention. What I have done in the past few weeks is to purchase a new Canon RF 24 to 105mm lens, and we can take a look at that in a future video. One of the positives of this lens is its wide aperture of f1.8. It does allow backgrounds to be thrown out of focus, but given the 35mm focal length, we do have to be quite close to our subject for this to be really effective. So here we're very close to our subject and the depth of field is quite limited at f1.8. But if I close down that aperture to f22, we see quite a difference at the other end of the scale. Here's another example shot at almost the same location as the previous one. You'll notice that the shutter speed is very high because we've got that wide aperture of f1.8. When we see the second shot, which I've taken at f22, you'll notice the massive difference between the two shutter speeds, to the degree that I even increased the ISO just a little bit to 200. It's that wide aperture of f1.8 that gives us access to those fast shutter speeds, and they're going to be useful at times. The other aspect of this lens that's worth mentioning is its ability to capture macro images at half-life size. My apologies for the boring subject, but I did need something that everyone knows the size of. This is just a standard fork. For this shot, the front of the lens was only about 3 inches from the subject. So with some wildlife subjects, we need to bear that fact in mind. We have to get rather close. Now this image wasn't shot to be used in this video at all. In fact, the very first day that I received the 35mm lens, the only thing I could find in the garden worth photographing was this frangipani flower. Now the fact that I'm hand holding and I'm up close on a dull day, hence the 2000 ISO, I was also far from a stable shooting position, holding the camera high above me and using the LCD to frame up. So I'm making good use here of the image stabilization both in the body and the lens. As you can see, 320th of a second at f8. Because I decided to make a short video on my experiences with this lens, I've made a few local trips out where I just carried the Canon R5 with the 35mm lens with a polarizing filter. Something perhaps I should have said earlier is that every image that I've used in this particular video was handheld. With two exceptions, they are the two fork images. So let me complete this video with just one or two of those pictures that I've shot recently using this lens.